Okay, welcome to ITU Presents. We're very, very lucky tonight because we are joined by Phil McKinney. Phil McKinney is the former CTO, Chief Technology Officer for Hewlett-Packard, HP, and he was also the CEO of Cable Labs. Phil has a very, very illustrious career. He's been in leadership positions for many, many years. He has a nationally syndicated radio show and podcast called Killer Innovations. He is somebody who is definitely worth you meeting. So we are all very lucky and honored to have Phil McKinney with us. Phil, thank you for joining us tonight.
No, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Before we begin, what is one of the things that you would like to just let people know about why you like to give talks and to do what you're doing now? Because we know that on a Saturday night, there are a number of things you could be doing even during quarantine.
Well, yes, I actually shared, we were getting ready to warm up. I'm actually on the East Coast right now. So it's 9 o'clock where I'm at right now, albeit don't let the picture behind me fool you, which is of Colorado, from my property there in Colorado. The reason I do these talks and have, been, giving some time both to ITU, but also other universities around the country, is it's my way to pay it forward. I was the beneficiary of a phenomenal mentor early in my career. And when I asked him how I could pay it back, he laughed and said I couldn't pay it back. I needed to find my own way to pay it forward, which is one of the reasons why I started the podcast in 2005, which is now the radio show, but also giving these kinds of talks both at ITU, and I do a master class at the D School at Stanford, and I teach at Columbia and at Colorado State University. So it's my way of investing into what would be yourselves being the next generation of leaders, and wanting to see all of you to be as successful, and and take the lessons and the trials and tribulations that those of us who've been in this space for quite some time. You get the benefit of hearing what went right, and in some cases what goes wrong, and taking that and applying it to your own career paths and your own passions and interests. So my mission here is to share and be as transparent as possible, and hopefully give you some insights as you move forward with your own education and with your careers.
Yeah, Phil, I really appreciate it. I think that's the reason why I got into education as well, was to give back. We know that your time is valuable. We appreciate what you're about to bestow upon us. So thank you in advance. And I think without further ado, let's go ahead and begin your talk. At the end, we'll probably want to ask some questions of you. Is that okay?
Yes, that'll be fine. We can ask questions. If you want, you can also use the Zoom chat feature, and then Jake or others can answer them when we get to the end. So that would be great. In fact, I do truly enjoy answering any questions, and the questions can be applied to anything I talk about, or if you've got questions about any specific career experiences or advice, you should feel free to ask those questions also.
So at the very end, for the class, just so that all the students know, what we'll be doing is we'll be taking a group picture with Mr. McKinney at the very end. So make sure to stay at the very end, have your screens on at the end. We're going to take a picture. We'll probably let him go for the rest of his evening, and then we'll just have a short time together afterwards to talk about the class. And we'll take attendance at the end. So right now, obviously, we're taking a look. We know who's here now. So definitely stay with us. And as Mr. McKinney said, feel free to send some questions in the chat box, and also feel free to ask questions afterwards. So without further ado, sir, please go ahead. Phil McKinney.
Thank you very much. Again, as I mentioned, I am not at my normal location in Colorado. I had previously attended students' presentations in the cybersecurity program that I was invited to attend, and really enjoyed that. And I've also delivered a commencement speech for ITU a couple of years ago, which was really a big highlight for me. I don't get asked to do many commencement speeches, so it was a real joy to be able to spend time with the ITU students graduating that year. The topic for today is to talk about disruption. We're obviously all dealing with some form of disruption given what's going on in the world. But what I want to do is I'm going to lay the foundation about the different types of disruption, and then we're going to just focus in on one of them. This is, one short section of a 16-hour course that I'm preparing to teach, starting in the second semester of the year. Think of it as kind of March, April timeframe. So this is one portion of that course. And we're, but it's an area I've taught this one a couple of times. I think you'll find it very interesting. But again, look forward to your questions. So what do I mean by disruption? Disruption is the act of a process of disrupting, of break or interrupting the normal course. We as humans, we like things to be nice and predictable and smooth and, no ripples and everything just kind of happens to the plan. But in reality, that's not the way life works out. We can have our careers disrupted, businesses can be disrupted, society can experience disruptions. There's all different kinds of disruptions. Now, I'll give you 3 business examples of disruptions just to kind of lay a little bit of context here. Blockbuster, Nokia, and Kodak. So we are getting to the point where, unless you're of the older generation, some people may not remember Blockbuster, but Blockbuster was the precursor to Netflix. But in fact, it was stores. You went in, you rented the DVD or the Blu-ray, or back in the old days, VHS tapes. You'd rent the movie, take it home, watch the movie, and then take it back to the store. What a lot of people don't recall with Blockbuster is that Blockbuster actually tried to create a streaming service. So think of Netflix before Netflix. But they tried it and it didn't work. Now, there was a number of reasons why it was not successful. The one being is that broadband, what we're benefiting today as we're sitting here all on Zoom, just was not at a speed or reliability that would allow for a streaming experience that we all now take advantage, whether we're doing it on a laptop or we're doing it on our phones, watching Netflix. This is a case where first mover, it may not be the best strategy. Netflix kind of saw what Blockbuster was doing, saw what they tried, waited and had patience, and then launched Netflix when certain things were in place. Take Nokia. Nokia was the leader in mobile phones. They had by far the dominant market share on a global basis. What happened? Apple came in and disrupted them. Now, was Apple the first one to come up with a smartphone? No, it was actually a product called the Nokia communicator. It was the first, what I would call, true smartphone. But it was early, first product out, and it had some challenges. The wireless networks weren't as good, didn't have as much bandwidth, really couldn't do web browsing on it that well. And Apple waited, and Apple came out with a better product. You look at Kodak. We all think of Kodak as the old film business. You drop in film into the camera, you take the picture, you take the film out, you send it in, get your prints made, your prints are sent to you. Kodak, however, was the first one to come up to develop a digital camera. Very low resolution, very poor quality. And Kodak just kind of wrote it off, saying, oh, digital photography will never be good. They were the first one in. But what happened was everybody else waited until technology was ready and then introduced better cameras, better resolution, better images. And now pretty much Kodak is no longer very minimally left in the photography business. So these are the kinds of disruptions that are business driven. Now they're technology driven also, and we'll talk more about this. But any established business, you run the risk if you are not developing a disruption strategy and how to prepare, and more importantly, how to respond, you run the risk of being disrupted. The flip side is if you want to do a startup, just because someone's in an established industry or an established business, even very large and successful, you can disrupt them. You can be successful even against very large and established businesses. Don't discount the fact that you may be working on an idea that's a new idea going against an established player that's already in the space. So what are the three types of disruptions? There are three types. One is what we call operational disruption. These are kind of the normal fluctuations of demand, sales cycles, supply, how much your raw commodities may change in price depending on the cost of those commodities. So things would be like supply chain disruption. If all of a sudden you had a key supplier who couldn't supply some key element that you needed in order to build your product, or a price war broke out. A competitor came in and radically lowered the price to the point where you knew you were going to do something different in order to respond, in order to remain competitive. There's the competitive disruption. So this is an attempt by one of your competitors to create some kind of a superior product, some advantage that's going to benefit them over the longer term. So examples would be Uber, basically disrupting the business model for on-demand transportation, basically disrupting the taxi and limousine industry. And then there's Tesla, right? They've created a sustainable advantage in electronic vehicles that now all the players in Detroit, all the major manufacturers of Ford, GM, et cetera, are all trying to compete against. They've created a disruption that competes against the established players that gives them some form of sustainable advantage on a going forward basis. And then the third is disruptive shocks. These are the unknowns. We just don't know, highly unpredictable. These are unexpected shocks. These are things that you just can't plan for, but have massive impact. So the one that we're dealing with right now is COVID. I don't think COVID was on anybody's radar screen as such a big disruption as it's turned out to be. But there's other disruptions. There's natural disasters, hurricanes, floods, earthquakes. You can't predict for them. But in the case of natural disasters, organizations do put strategies in place in order to respond or react to those kinds of disruptions. So what I'm going to talk about today is around these disruptive shocks. These are these sudden, surprising events that stop things from normally happen. If you think about disruptive shocks, with COVID, the impact on small businesses and restaurants and getting into office buildings and, people getting back to work and work from home and disrupting to education in schools and all the things that we've experienced. Disruptive shocks are the ones that can be most impactful, particularly if we don't create a disruption strategy. How do we think about these disruptions? Now, in the case of disruptive shock, we think about it in the context of businesses, work from home, or education, but they can also be very disruptive to careers. Entire industries can be disrupted. And how do you deal with that from a career perspective also? So, some of these disruptive shocks, California, I lived there for many years when I was the CTO for Hewlett Packard, lived in Silicon Valley. I lived down in San Jose. But sitting in Colorado and seeing the fires that are going on and how do you deal with that, it's just heartbreaking when you look at that. Colorado, we've had some fires, but nowhere near the fires that are happening in California. Flooding, If you look at what's happening in Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, Texas, most recently with all of the hurricanes coming in off of the Atlantic and the amount of flooding and damage. My family got impacted by Hurricane Michael. It hit Panama City Beach. My daughter and son-in-law and 3 grandkids live there. My wife happened to be there with them when Hurricane Michael happened, tearing, the roof off the house, and how disruptive it has been to a community. Earthquakes, California, when I lived there, we always had the annual earthquake drills and preparing and making sure that we had everything in place that you can prepare to be self-sustaining in an earthquake so that you can, be able to survive waiting for help and aid to arrive. And then I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in Illinois, where tornadoes were kind of a common thing. We have had them happen during their season, right? But again, if you lived in an area that was frequented by things like tornadoes, you could plan for it. You built a basement in your house. You had storm shelters. You knew where to go when the sirens went off, those kinds of things. So these are things that you can plan for, even though they are disruptive shocks, and they will still be very disruptive, but you can plan for them. The one that we're dealing with now is coronavirus. So COVID-19, we've all been, dealing with that since January, end of January, early February of this year. That's one it's hard to plan for. How do you plan for it? Now, later on, I'm going to share you with some of my stories of having gone through previous pandemics that had impacts, particularly at HP, and what we experienced and what we learned from them as part of our disruption strategies, so that the organization can be in the best possible position to be able to be sustained and to be able to respond to the customer's needs when you have these sudden disruptive shocks that occur. So let me walk you through some of my own experiences in these disruptive shocks. One was SARS, right? So SARS had a huge impact as a pandemic, and the impact of supply chain coming out of China. Now, SARS didn't have a big, huge impact on the overall world. It was pretty well contained, albeit we had some issues with SARS in other parts of the world, but it's nowhere near like COVID. But it was pretty impactful to the supply chain. Coming out of SARS, what most hardware manufacturers like an HP or a Dell or Sun Microsystems or Cisco and those that were around at that time is everybody focused on making your supply chain as resilient and as robust as possible. Dual sourcing everything, so you didn't get everything from source A. You had 2 options for everything, and those 2 suppliers were geographically dispersed. So if you had an issue in China, you could still get parts from, Vietnam as an example. So there was a lot of work that came out of SARS focused on building out supply chain. HP got severely impacted by SARS, but it forced us to retool the entire supply chain. And that's not an easy thing. A lot of people don't think of this, but when HP, before it was split most recently into 2 companies, when it was one company, and when I was there at that time, when I was CTO, had the largest technology supply chain in the world. The total supply chain at HP, if you think about it, we were 120 billion in revenue. So it was about 90 billion of raw commodity goods that kind of came in and got manipulated by this supply chain. It was massive, and we retooled it as a result of SARS. The second issue that we ran into, which was a disruptive shock, not a pandemic, was the Fukushima tsunami. So this is the tsunami that impacted the nuclear reactors and that in the Fukushima in Japan. Now, with SARS, we thought we had the supply chain issues all worked out, but guess what? We didn't. we missed what we called second order supply chain. And what do I mean by a second order supply chain? So if you think about a laptop, laptops today typically do not have DVD, Blu-ray players in them. Very few do, because now most content is available streaming. Back then, though, Blu-ray, DVD player drives and laptops were very popular. So we had two suppliers. We could get DVD and Blu-ray players from two different suppliers. Either one was interchangeable. So if we had a supply issue from one, we had a backup, no issue. What we were unaware of is both of those Blu-ray DVD players, their suppliers had overlap. We only had we had a couple of suppliers that supplied to both of those manufacturers. In this example, there is a little microspring that had an impact and resulted in the issues of opening up the Blu-ray or DVD drive, which popped out your disc. And the result, though, is we couldn't get those little springs. They were made by a little manufacturer in Fukushima, and as a result, we could not get access to those springs and couldn't ship any laptops. So instantly, all of our laptops were 100% of sales suddenly came to an end. Third is we had the Hurricane Katrina, and that was the issue of I was asked by President Bush to go to New Orleans to lead the effort of rebuilding broadband networks, in this case, Wi-Fi networks across the city of New Orleans as part of the rebuilding of Katrina. And what it really opened my eyes to was the need for collaboration and cooperation. These kinds of natural disasters, particularly ones that was so devastating that basically took an entire city and moved it offline. They literally turned off every bit of power into New Orleans. When I arrived back into the city post-Katrina to start my work there at the request of the White House, there was no electricity inside of New Orleans. It was literally rebooting a city, and nobody had ever done that before. But the challenges we ran into was the lack of collaboration and the lack of cooperation, which dragged out the recovery much longer than it needed to be. And so that just kind of was burned into my brain of when you have these kinds of disruptions, that is not the time to play who knew most or politics or trying to take advantage of somebody. Maybe it's not even a time where you should not be taking advantage of a competitor. Bill Hillett and David Packard, there was a significant series of fires in Silicon Valley back in the early 50s. Its competitors got wiped out. Bill and Dave actually gave one of the factories at HP over to a competitor so that the competitor could restart their business. These kinds of disruptions, it's not the time to go on the offensive. It's not also the time to go on the defensive. It's the time to come together, to collaborate and to cooperate. For that's what's needed for industries and society to make it through these kinds of disruptive shocks. For governments, these are related to economic and community recoveries. I've been involved with Rwanda. So if you're familiar with Rwanda, 1994 genocide, if you haven't watched the Hotel Rwanda movie, watch it. 800,000 people killed in 106 days, the most concentrated genocide in the history of man. I've led an effort with Western investors investing in startup companies in Rwanda in an attempt to rebuild the economy there, starting, in 1999, 2000, 2001, 4 or 5 years after the genocide. And again, this is a great example in the case of Rwanda about creating a culture of forgiveness, where the people who perpetrated the genocide were forgiven in order to ensure that the country could come together. I've never seen it before, but it's always been the poster child for me on what communities can do when they come together. And then the COVID-19. Now, I'm currently am the CEO at Cable Labs. If you're not familiar with Cable Labs, we are referred to as the Bell Labs of the cable industry. 200 researchers, 45 PhDs, and other 50, 60 master's degree researchers. We invent the technology that provides broadband services over cable. So if you get your broadband from Comcast, Cox, Charter, if you're in the Valley, odds are you're getting it from Comcast. It uses a technology called DOCSIS that was invented at Cable Labs. So we are the Bell Labs of the cable industry. When COVID kicked in, the immediate question we were flooded with from governments around the world is the readiness of the network to support people to work from home, to support students being able to do school from home, broadband becoming that critical infrastructure. And I can tell you, myself and my team, we were doing, yeoman's work, working all kinds of hours in order to make sure we could monitor the networks. We support the 65 largest cable broadband providers in the world. That includes JCOM in Japan, and NBN in Australia, and Vodafone in Europe, and Comcast and Charter in the US, Rogers and Shaw in Canada, Izzy in Mexico, you name it. We're the research organization, and helping them in order to support what was happening during the time of the early COVID days. And all of these things kind of amalgamated themselves into kind of a set of strategies that I've written down. I am taped to the wall next to my desk in order to remind myself, because one of the things that tends to happen when disruptions, when shocking things happen, things that are unanticipated, is people freeze. They stop. They don't know what decision to make, so they're afraid to make any decision. So what I'm going to share with you as we go through the rest of this talk is what are some of those things that you can do when you get surprised. And that surprise can be you're working on a new idea. It could be your job role in a company. It could be your career, right? Nobody anticipates, ever getting laid off, right? I've gotten laid off. I've gotten fired from a job, right? So, we've all been through it, right? And everybody kind of retracts and freezes. And that's actually the worst thing you can do. We're going to talk about this. So what are the lessons learned that that I had with this? One is do not assume others will help or save you. You can't sit back and wait that someone's going to come in and pluck you out. If you're a company and you're disruptive in your supply chain, you can't wait. You can't assume that somebody's going to step up to help. They may, but you can't assume so. Number two is be decisive. Take action. Take action. In Katrina, when I showed up, I had a sleeping bag, a backpack, and I was sleeping in flatbed tractor trucks in New Orleans with no electricity, no residents. Think of the craziest apocalyptic film you've ever seen. That's what I arrived at in Katrina. It'd be easy to just kind of freeze up and not even know how to start because nobody'd ever done it. Step out, do something, try it, move forward. If it doesn't work out, adjust. Try something else. And if it doesn't work out, adjust. COVID-19, we made the fortunate call very, very early, ahead of most companies around the world, to protect our staff and shift everything to a work from home very, very early, and to put in place the ability to monitor and manage and oversee and support the broadband networks around the world that allow people to work from home and kids to work from home, et cetera. So be decisive and make a decision. It may not be the right decision. Guess what? Nobody's perfect. You might make a wrong decision, but be decisive and take action. Number 3 was prioritize possible impacts. Constantly be looking at, if I make this decision or this decision, what are my possible impacts? And then test them. Do they work out? Do they lead to something? And play. You constantly need to play the what if game. What if this happens? And what if that happens? And what if we do this? And what if we do that? So you've got to reprioritize, because guess what? You can come up with a list of 500 items, and that will just totally stress everybody out. Focus on the top 2 or 3 that are most important, and then work your way through those. If you try to focus on 200, you can't keep all that in your head, and all you get is you just get yourself stressed out. Disruptions happen. Focus on the ones that have the prioritize those, the ones that are going to have the impact. Number 4 is you need to have high velocity experimentation. I actually did a show on my radio show probably 4 months ago, I'm thinking, around an author who wrote a phenomenal book on experimentation. And I'm trying to remember the author's name, but I'm not going to think of it off the top of my head. But high velocity experimentation, the ability to say, hey, I'm going to try this. This is what I anticipate to happen. And if that doesn't happen, then I know that I tried that experiment, and I can check that off as not being the path that we should take. Let's do another experiment. Let's do another experiment. So you do lots of these small little experiments to help you search out what are some of the possible ways to deal with disruption or deal with change happening to your organization. And number 5 is adjust and adapt. You're not going to be perfect in your decision. You're not going to be perfect in your execution. Guess what? Nobody's perfect, right? Nobody is. But as a result, the ability to be highly flexible, highly adaptable, highly willing to try and adjust, absolutely critical. Now, given those rules, there are also some disruptive questions you can ask. If you're dealing with disruption, whether it's disruption in your career, disruption happening to an industry, whatever it might be, the question is, these are just a series of questions to ask yourself as you think about this. For instance, if you have somebody who you would think of as kind of a real poster child for, somebody you just really admire, a business leader, a technology leader, whatever, sit back and put yourself in their shoes, right? So, what would Elon Musk do with COVID-19? What would Steve Jobs do with COVID-19? What would, Bill Gates do, right? What would, Bob Iger from Disney do? Whatever, put yourself in their shoes. So it's not putting the pressure on you. Think about what they would do. You might come up with some interesting ideas to deal with that disruption. Ask yourself, what's the one thing we absolutely should not do in this situation, right? There's some things that you want to just draw a line and say, that is something we are not going to do. We saw this in COVID-19 with the large number of businesses who made the commitment not to furlough their staff, not to lay off their staff. At Cable Labs, we made the commitment that we would not lay off and we would not furlough. We have not laid off a single staff member nor furloughed anybody from Cable Labs throughout the entire COVID-19. Define what it is you absolutely should not or would not be willing to do. Now, if you're involved in an organization or a business, or you're leading a team, or you're working with your boss who leads, an organization within some type of a corporate structure, ask yourself, what would happen if we stop doing, or we ask others to stop doing the following? What is it we would ask them? What would it be the benefit if we had asked somebody to stop doing something, to stop some activity? Example on this would be, in the case of SARS and in the case of the Fukushima, when HP experienced a supply chain failure, we took a pretty unique approach. What we did is we went to the suppliers and we said, stop manufacturing. right? Because look, we're hung up. We can't absorb what you're manufacturing. Now we know that by us telling you to stop, you're going to have a significant financial impact. So here's what we're going to do. We are going to advance you 1 year of the revenue we would normally spend with you. 10 million, 100 million, 500 million, $1 billion. We'd write you a check for 12 months of volume. We want you to use that money to keep your employees in place, to keep your organization available, because we have confidence that when this issue gets behind us, when COVID gets behind us, when the Fukushima tsunami happened, it got behind us, that the market would come back, and we need you. Now, in return for us to advance you 1 year of revenue, we want to make sure that we have priority access to your supply when the market does come back. The loyalty that built with suppliers with HP is just unimaginable. And today, even today at HP benefits from those kinds of relationships with the suppliers versus everybody else was just busy turning knobs off, conserve cash, don't buy, shut everything down. Then you have the problem of how do you restart the business. So ask yourself, what would happen if we stopped doing something? If we asked somebody else to stop doing so, stop manufacturing. Now that could have a very negative effect. We tell you stop manufacturing, but we're still going to give you 1 year of our revenue to make sure that you survive, so that you're available to support, be a supplier to us at some point in the future. Very unique strategy. Now, I wish I could take credit that I came up with it. I wasn't the one that came up with it. Guy by the name of Tony Profit, who now actually is the Chief Diversity Officer at Salesforce. Tony was head of supply chain at HP at the time. Brilliant executive. And this was Tony Profit's strategy that had a phenomenal impact on HP success. Now, the other question that we should be asking ourselves, and this is an opportunity also for entrepreneurs thinking about what's the new thing you can create that's going to create success out of disruptions. Disruptions aren't all negative. Disruptions can be very impactful to existing organizations. But if you're starting out and you want to come up with an idea to launch a new business, these kinds of disruptions are actually at a very good time to start something new. So one example is the disruption of the Depression, right? 1929, 31 in the United States, right? The general rule is you don't start a new company in the Depression, right? Well, some of the companies that started in the U.S. when the U.S. was in depression in the late 20s, early 30s, the Walt Disney Company, Hewlett Packard started in the middle of the Depression. There's a whole slew of brand name companies today that all started in the middle of the Depression. We're in the middle of COVID-19. People are like, well, I don't know if I should start my new entrepreneur thing in the middle of COVID-19. It actually could be a pretty good time if you really think through what some of those opportunities are. So the question that I challenge people to think about is what customer segments could be significantly impacted as a result of COVID-19. So we've seen them, right? Sports and concerts, things where fans get together. We're not all, driving, to concerts or driving to the stadium to watch Sunday football. But look, we now do have sports. We're doing concerts via Zoom. Things that have happened. 2, travel, the influence, tourist industry, huge negative impact, right? But it's coming back. I just drove from Colorado to Kentucky, and I'm on my way to North Carolina, right? Roads are not as crowded as they were before, but they're not empty. Restaurants are open. People are out there, traveling, even with the COVID, but people have had to figure out a new way to do business and a new way to travel. Home buyers. I don't know about California, but in Colorado, you can't find a house there. Everything that's on the market is sold. People are wanting to live rural. They want to live in the mountains. They want to live not in the urban areas, right? Number four, foodies, right? People go to restaurants. There's a woman who worked with me at HP who's really into eating at Michelin star top tier restaurants, right? If she would travel around the world in order to go to Michelin star restaurants that she has not eaten at, right? Well, can't travel now. Uh, but what she's found is there's a bunch of very Michelin star restaurants in the Bay Area that are doing curbside. So she orders from these very, very high end restaurants, right? We figured out how we can still eat out without eating out through this whole process. And then five, the germ conscious segment. There's people who have always been very, very conscious of any kind of germs. Howie Mandel, comedian, very famous on TV. He's on America's Got Talent as a judge. He's what we would refer as a germaphobe. He doesn't shake hands, won't touch doorknobs. And this was pre-COVID, much less, now with COVID and people with heavy duty hand washing and all of those kinds of things. So there's segments in our population that have been significantly impacted. The question being is, what could you invent? What could you innovate to be able to open up these new market segments? The other question is what customer segments could emerge as a result of COVID-19? What are some segments that don't exist today but could emerge as part of COVID? Number one, social distancing butler. I actually have one of these. My wife has underlying health issues, so we have to be very careful about who we have in the house and how we have items that are brought in. And, as a result of that, we have a friend who we pay, and she graciously goes and does all of our shopping for us. She does all the grocery shopping. She brings the food to the house. She leaves it at the front doorstep. It works out fantastic. And that has worked out to be an incredibly great service in the middle of the COVID-19 and social distancing. COVID gig workers, we've seen, companies like Walmart hiring lots of people in order to fill in, to meet with the demand. DoorDash and Uber Eats delivering food to people's houses. There's even talk now of unions to unionize these workers, right? Rather than just being kind of a short-term kind of gig workers. Number three, virtual babysitting. This is my wife. We are grandparents. We have 5, grandchildren. My wife uses her Facebook portal, and she literally virtually babysits the grandkids on Facebook portal. So my daughters can get a little bit of a break with COVID. They get on, they play games, they sing songs, they read books to each other over Facebook portal, and it's worked out incredibly well. And then there's virtual background creators. This shot that's behind me, normally I'm in my broadcast studio in Colorado. I have a full green screen and studio lighting and all of that. But that image behind me is of the image from my house in Colorado looking onto the mountains. Now I'm sitting in Kentucky, right? But Zoom allows you to have the virtual background. A number of you actually are showing virtual backgrounds. There's now a whole industry out there of artists who will create for you a custom virtual background so that yours looks really sharp and professional and, all those kinds of things. And so that's a whole new market segment, whole new industry that nobody would have thought of prior to COVID-19. So disruptions, while we think of them as bad, they also create opportunities. They create opportunities for those who are wanting and willing to innovate, to use their brain power to come up with really great ideas that they can move forward. And who knows, you could become the the next billionaire with a great idea that's in response to COVID-19. So again, navigating disruptive shocks really really important. One is, again, I'm just going to reiterate these, but go into a little bit more detail about them. One is decisive leadership. It's not about getting consensus. Now this applies to those of you that are in more leadership roles, right? When I was CTO at HP, I worked for 4 different CEOs: Carly Fiorina, Mark Hurd, Lou, and then I worked for Meg Whitman. But even in my role, even though I wasn't the top executive, decisive leadership, just leadership within what you can control. It's not about getting consensus, because you're going to hear a lot of possible information, but make a decision. First decision you should make is start innovating. Everybody thinking about, how do I solve the problem, put my finger in the dye, right? Start innovating. If you go back and you look at industries and you look at businesses that started from the standpoint of when when things were going bad, those that focused on the innovation had phenomenal success. In fact, if you innovate through depressions, if you innovate through economic downturns, you innovate through disruptions, those businesses, those industries that innovate, creating the new product or services that are going to be your revenue drivers in the future, they are orders of magnitude more profitable and more successful on the other side. Once you get through an economic downturn, once you get through a disruption, those that pull back and stop, those are the ones that actually have long-term negative impacts. Now, the fast start, when you say start innovating today, is the innovation through collaboration. And I'm going to spend some time talking about that. I've got a list of different ways to collaborate. If you think of innovation as just being the lone inventor, that's a myth, not true. Innovation is a team sport. But so innovation through collaboration, whether it's your classmates or somebody else that has a skill set that you need in order to make your idea real, collaboration, absolutely critical. Third point, get input from everybody within reason. Be careful who you ask for input or ideas on, because you'll hear all kinds of crazy ideas. Get input from everybody within reason. Be optimistic. Disruptions everybody can view them as pretty negative. Be optimistic, right? I get interviewed a fair amount by the press with regards to, COVID-19 and work from home and education from home. And there's a chapter in my book where I did work for the U.S. Department of Education, so I'm pretty plugged in on what's happening in those segments. It's really easy to be negative. Now, we can all point to things not going right? But those people who are negative tend not to be the big innovators. Those that are optimistic are the ones who tend to be those innovators, those inventors, those people who are creative that have the biggest success. So be optimistic. Find the optimistic perspective of what it is you're working on. And the other pieces is, but have a plan B, right? Don't be, overly optimistic. That's unrealistic. Have a plan B. Next is be prepared for the rebound. This is what I talked about with regards to funding, supply chain partners, your staff, not laying off staff, right? So in my case at Cable Labs, my executive team and I, we absolutely just drew the line. We would not lay anybody off. We would not furlough anybody, right? We would keep going forward as is. Because when the rebound happens, and it's going to happen, look, COVID's not going to last forever. We're going to be back to normal at some point, hopefully sooner rather than later. But just as we went through the Spanish flu here in the United States, and it got past us after 18 months, we will get past COVID, right? So you better have a plan for the rebound. If you're going to think about launching an idea, starting a new business, being an entrepreneur, now's that time, maybe the perfect time to start your idea, because when that rebound happens, people are going to be hungry for new things. And then if you are in a leadership role, sources of savings may surprise you. I can tell you at HP, when we made the decision that we were going to fund our supply chain in order to keep them in place, the supply chain reacted, one, unbelievably positive, but then they worked with us on helping find savings so they didn't need as much money to stay in existence, because they knew we were giving them real cash. It wasn't just like, how much can I get? It was, how do we all come together? And you'd be surprised at people's willingness to take savings. In fact, at Cable Labs, when we announced that we would not lay anybody off, and we would not furlough anybody, the staff reacted and actually offered up no merit increase until we get past COVID. No pay increases. It wasn't something that was dictated to them. Some of the leadership team came and said, we think this is the right thing. We can all contribute to that. By being transparent and letting people know the challenges you're facing. And look, for me, from a career perspective, I can tell you, early in my career, when I stumbled and things didn't work out, and I got fired from one company, and I got laid off or whatever, my immediate reaction is to be very quiet about it. Don't say anything. It's embarrassing. People are going to think less of me. Later in my career, when I had those stumbling blocks and I shared it, people will rally around and contribute and help. And those sources will surprise you of what people will do to reach out and help. So let's talk specifically about innovation through collaboration. I'm going to wrap this up in 5 minutes because I want to make sure we have more than ample time for questions. There's a lot of different ways to innovate through collaboration. I absolutely believe that innovation is a team sport. If you think about you're going to innovate on your own, that's a myth, right? Steve Jobs had Steve Wozniak. Bill Hewlett had David Packard, right? Bill Gates had Paul Allen, right? You go through any of the big, highly successful, look, even Elon, right? Everybody thinks about Elon as being the guy, right? Now, again, I've had the benefit of having spent a fair amount of time with Elon, and within each of his businesses, whether it's SpaceX or Tesla or Boring, right? He's kind of the face, but his team that he partners with in each of those businesses, absolutely critical for his success. Innovation is absolutely critical through collaboration. With innovation is a team sport, part of the challenge in a lot of organizations, inside of organizations, is across teams. You got the research team, you got the product development team, you got however your organization is organized. Now, I can tell you some of the most valued employees that I've ever had in my career are people that are on teams that do not care about silos. They don't care about who they report to. They collaborate across teams. If you want to have an absolutely highly successful career, be that innovator within your organization. Be the one willing to reach across and innovate with people across the entire organization, not just within the team you are assigned. And I can list the names of every one of staff people that worked with me or for me or peers of mine that did that, because it is rare for those people to exist. And if you are one of those, you will stand out. Your leadership will notice you, and your career path will be completely different. treat innovation as a team sport. Academic collaboration, collaborate with academic researchers. At, at HP, we funded collaboration in about 185 different universities around the world. At Cable Labs, I went from 47,000 engineers to 200. So my scale is completely different than when I was at HP. But even at Cable Labs, we fund academic research. We fund Stanford, we have Caltech, we have University of Chicago, Georgia Tech, Cambridge, but on very specific research programs that are very specific to areas of interest for us. Why do we do this? Why? Because we look at academic researchers, people who are working on fundamental sciences that are 10 years plus out in the future, to be a great source for our innovation funnel, right? And it's no longer where you get these islands. Again, it's this collaboration. So we take the work that's coming 10 years out, and we marry it with our work at the right time, and we turn it into phenomenal new products and technologies. Then there's industry collaborations. How do you get industries to come together, right? How do you get industries to work together rather than be competing against each other? Cable Labs, perfect example. We've been around for 32 years. We are funded by the cable industry, Comcast, Charter, Cox, Rogers, Shaw, Vodafone, and NBN, JCOM in Japan, right? All of these cable operators coming together, they fund us, right? Because they know that the industry is better together, working together and sharing that R&D costs. Not long after I took over as the CEO for Cable Labs in June of 2012, the healthcare industry reached out. And the healthcare industry realized they needed to come together and they needed to collaborate. So they needed to bring together hospital systems, device manufacturers, universities that focused on healthcare. How do they come together and collaborate? So we actually took the Cable Labs model and we helped the healthcare industry create their own version of Cable Labs. It's called CMI, the Center for Medical Interoperability, headquartered in Nashville, Tennessee. And I think it's like 80 something now, leading hospital systems around the country all come together and they collaborate. Yeah, you can think they compete within the regions or geographies, but they understand and they've already seen the benefit of an industry coming together and working together and not thinking of each other as competitors. There's also government collaboration. In the case of government collaboration, there's ways to work with government agencies to get funding, funding that does not dilute any of the equity ownership, right? So it's funding that does not require anybody to sell stocks or shares. So there's SBIR, Small Business Innovation Research Grants. Most government agencies have SBIR programs, whether that be U.S. Department of Defense or Treasury or Federal Trade Commission or FCC. And then there's DARPA, the Defense Agency Research Program Administration, right? So this is DARPA funded. We're sitting here on the internet. The internet was invented by DARPA. DARPA funded the original creation of the internet. We are a beneficiary of government collaboration, government collaborating with industry. Government has lots of dollars. They have very unique needs, but their needs at the beginning, internet was not designed for what we use it today, sitting here on a Zoom call. It was designed to make networks resilient between critical infrastructure should the Cold War result in a bomb being dropped. But now we're the beneficiary of that. So we can do work with government collaborations that then have long-term commercial opportunities. And then the last one is co-innovation. Now, I am a big, huge believer in co-innovation. Co-innovation is when two companies come together. It's a 50-50 funding model. They each pay 50-50. It's around collaborating in an area of strong mutual interest where neither one of them can do it on their own. So there's a dependency. These two have to work together because there's no other way they can do this without each other. Corning is the perfect example. Wendell Weeks, who's the chairman and CEO at Corning, phenomenal leader. He's probably I'd put him in probably one of the top 5 or top 10 CEOs in the world. But Corning has a phenomenal history of co-innovation. A lot of people don't realize Corning co-innovated with Apple for the invention of Gorilla Glass. So the extra strong glass that is on your Apple, but now it's on your Android phone. It happens to be on this HP laptop. It has Gorilla Glass on it. That was a result of a co-innovation project between Wendell Weeks as the chairman and CEO at Corning and Steve Jobs. But again, they realized that they needed this, that neither one of them can do it on their own. So there was a mutual dependency, and it was a 50-50 funding model. They both contributed to that effort. And the result was unbelievable success. So kind of wrapping all of this up, this is just some contact information that you have it. But in wrapping up, from my perspective on when you think about disruption and disruption strategies, one is don't freeze, don't pause, don't shut down, continue moving forward. Absolutely critical. Be decisive, and the first decision you should make is to innovate. If you're within an organization, get your organization to innovate products and services either that are the result of what the disruption is about, or to put your business in the best possible position when the recovery happens. Be positive. The recoveries do happen. Recessions don't last forever. Pandemics don't last forever. Depressions don't last forever, right? We will get back to normal. Be prepared. Be willing to drive those innovations. That first decision is to innovate, and the best way to do that, the quick step to do that, is innovation through collaboration. And I just shared with you what some of those options are about how do you collaborate when it comes to innovation. So with that, I am actually going to pause here, and we will open it up for questions. And again, your questions can be, and I'm going to stop the screen share so that way I can see everybody. But the questions can be about anything I talked about or anything with regards to my career, my background, my experiences, whatever people want. I don't think we have anything in chat yet. Nope, nothing in chat.
So if everybody can turn on your screens, that way we can have as close to an in-person conversation as possible. I really want to thank you, Phil. What you said was wise, not only in business, but what you gave was very clear life lessons as well. If you think about collaboration and not retreating when something comes up that's difficult and challenging, and actually moving forward and connecting with people, a lot of what you talked about is incredible for life lessons as well. So,
yes,
I appreciate that. Very much so, because I think part of what happens when things are difficult and there is something that's disruptive, sometimes people get scared, and it's both a professional and a personal situation.
Yes.
So, I have a question that had come up in terms of your book, Beyond the Obvious: Killer Questions That Spark Game-Changing Innovation. And you talk about corporate antibodies. Can you talk a little bit about corporate antibodies?
So the book refers to as corporate antibodies. Sometimes I'll refer to them as innovation antibodies, but these are the people within your within any organization. It doesn't matter whether it's a 5-person startup or 240,000 employees at HP. You will have people who are the naysayers. You may have come up with an idea, a new product, a new piece of technology. And they're going to be the ones that are going to say, oh, that'll never work, or oh, we tried that before, or whatever, right? And there are a few groupings or types of people that these run into. So you have what I call the ego antibodies. So these are the people who think they should be the ones to come up with the idea, and who are you to be the one coming up with ideas? And then there's the no risk antibodies. So these are the people that are typically in the finance department or the legal department. Their sole job is to avoid risk. The fatigue antibodies. These are the people who've tried it before you and were not successful. So they're the ones that are kind of trying to wave you off like, oh, I tried that before and I wasn't able to get funding, or nobody liked my ideas. So, go away. No one's going to like your idea either. And then there's the comfort antibodies. When things are going well, people don't want to change, right? Everything's like, hey, everything's going up and to the right. Don't rock the boat. Don't do anything. So in the book, I actually walk through the antibodies, and there's things you can do to actually get around these antibodies, or to actually get these antibodies to all of a sudden be supportive of your product. Now, even where I'm at with my career, my background, and the success I've had, I still today get antibodies, right? And we have to also be honest with ourselves. Sometimes we are the antibody, right? If we are kind of like naysaying somebody else's idea, like, I don't know, I don't think, if someone's pitching you an idea, the best thing you could do is take that idea and what I call plus it. How do you take that idea and make it 2 times better? You may, someone comes with a really crazy idea, you go, yes, and if we did this, it could be even better. Not do and but, because as soon as someone says the word but, there's a negative to it. You should say, and yes, I like that idea. Yes, I did. Yes. And here, if we did this to it, we can make it so much better. That's how innovators support each other. That's how creatives help each other to be successful. It's not being the antibody. It's being that yes and person to help someone improve the idea that the person has come up with.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. Again, another life lesson as well. I think people have the people in their lives who tell them, don't try that, don't do that. The group that you have before you, a lot of the people here have traveled from their home countries and are here now. And I'm sure there are a number of people who told a lot of you on this Zoom chat here, like, don't do that. And so I commend you all for taking that risk. Phil talked about, taking that opportunity, trying something out fast, seeing if it works. If it doesn't work, maybe retooling it, adapting, right? HP was a very great example in terms of the loyalty that they gave to their supply chain to keep them going in terms of adapting. And that's a huge, huge company that adapted.
Yeah.
And it's hard for big companies to work that quickly and be that quick to change. I would love to take a photo of everybody here with Phil, and then we're going to open it up to questions to everybody. But everybody turn on your camera. We're just going to two things. One, this is attendance technically, and two, it's to take a photo with our honored guest here. So here we go. Everybody look at the camera and let's all smile. Hold on. 1, 2, and 3. There we go. All right. So I'm going to open up to questions here. So go ahead and ask some questions. Part of this class is participation. So questions are always welcome. And as Phil said, don't be shy about things. Move forward and just ask away.
We actually have 2 questions in the chat. One question is I'd like to ask one question. Can you let us know what the main difference is between industry collaboration and co-innovation? Co-innovation is 2 companies, so Apple and Corning, coming together. An industry collaboration would be all the companies that are within a given industry, in the case of healthcare or in the case of cable broadband, or so in the case of Cable Labs, which is an industry collaboration, we're funded by 65 cable operators from around the world, 35 countries. So that would be the industry collaboration. It's an entire industry coming together. Co-innovation, lesson learned, if you try to do more than two companies, the wheels fall off the bus. So for me, kind of the hard and fast rule is two companies, Apple, Corning coming together. In fact, at Cable Labs, we just announced a co-innovation project recently. It was us and one other company, right? Those are just two companies to solve a very particular problem, because you have to keep it small in order to keep it focused, in order to not run into the complexities of large organizations. So that's the difference between co-innovation and industry collaboration. Another question from YouTube: how do you think about the AI technology? I'm a big believer of AI. In fact, at Cable Labs, we were lucky to be able to recruit Dr. Bernardo Huberman from Stanford to head our research AI program at Cable Labs. He works out of our Silicon Valley office, which is over at our facility is at the corner, right near the corner of Matilda and West California, right near downtown Sunnyvale. And Bernardo and his team of himself and his PhD students from Stanford, all working on behalf of our work there. So I'm a big believer of it. I think there's a little bit of overhype in it. Everybody claims everything's got AI in it. A little bit of big data, and all of a sudden now it turns into AI. But AI, when you're dealing with systems complexity, large systems complexity, in many cases is a must. You don't have the ability to treat it, manage it, analyze it, or leverage it just because of the sheer scale and size and complexities of what's happening inside these large complex systems. So I think AI is here. It's going to be part of our lives. I do think a lot about, and I've written a fair amount about what I call innovation ethics. And there's been some posts. You can go over to my blog over at philmckinney.com and you can read some of those articles. Because I do think that we do need to think about ethics in our work as innovators. We've seen an absolute explosion in academic research that's had to been retracted because of falsified data. And that is just absolutely disastrous, because it feeds a perception of, can you trust scientists? Can you trust engineers? Can you trust innovators? Right? And just as the same as medical doctors, we have an ethical obligation to be truthful, to be transparent, to be, to not cause harm in the work and in the innovations that we create. And so I think a lot about it. I think, and that applies to AI. I think are there risks to AI? Yes. I think, can it be misused? Anything we invent as innovators can be misused. But I think, one of the things that I would, challenge all of us to think about is the ethics. We've seen some recent things in Silicon Valley with companies like Theranos, right, where you've got ethical lapses that happen that then have huge ripple effects on employees and investors and reputations and et cetera. So I'm a big believer. I think AI has a huge potential. I think it's a very interesting research area. It's got a lot of areas that can be leveraged to the benefit of society. But I'd always want to balance anything new, not just AI, but anything in a new area, whether it be DNA, splicing or CRISPR, or you name the technology. We should hold each of ourselves accountable to a certain ethical bar when we work in new areas like this.
So we're going to open it up to the questions from you all online, right here with Phil. So feel free to ask some questions here. Phil, I'm going to ask you one more while people are thinking of a question. You talked about the idea of being able to collaborate across teams, and in terms of loyalty with one another. You're talking about no layoffs, no furloughs. So you talked a lot about understanding who fits in the group. There was a course that we've now wrapped into a different course that used to be called General Production Pipelines. And the purpose of that course was to let people know, hey, you may be a UI designer, but you should probably know what this other person is doing.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I want to ask you a little bit about the importance of really understanding the roles. And sometimes people are fearful of, well, I'm not an expert. That's not what I do. But I think it's very important for people to think you don't have to be the expert. It's important to understand what people are doing. So maybe talk with us a little bit about the collaboration across teams so that can be more effective.
Well, here, I'll let you in on probably the cornerstone secret to my career success. You have a choice in your career. You can be what I call an I-shaped individual. You can be very deep in one technical area. My background is I'm a software engineer by training. My specialty was in high-speed pattern recognition. So I could do very high-speed pattern identification in images, which led to work in things like biometric fingerprint security devices starting in the early 80s. But that means I would be very deep in one area. My career success really came from my mentor, Bob Davis, turning me into what's called a T-shaped individual. So I may be very deep in one area, and that's my area of expertise, but I had to have familiarity with all the other pieces that I would be dependent on in order to have success. This concept of if I've got really good technology, I'm guaranteed success is bogus. Don't fall into that trap, because there's so many other things: sales, marketing, finance, IT, legal, right? There's so many other pieces that you have to understand. And, Jake, your point about this production piece, you can no longer just know the one piece you're in, because you need to be able to understand beginning to end, what does it really take and what role you play, and how do you take advantage of supporting, how do you leverage, how do you help all those other pieces, because you need all of them to come together in the right time in order to have any shot of success for what it is you're working on. The days of being self-contained, one person, and you're over in the corner doing your thing on your own, doesn't exist anymore. Innovation, creativity, technology development, it is a team that has to bring those pieces together. And so if you want to know the key to career success is become a T-shaped individual. Get experiences in all of these other areas. In my case, early in my career, I was put on job rotation. So I spent 6 months in finance. I spent 6 months carrying a sales quota in the field. I spent 6 months in marketing. I spent 6 months in advertising, right? I did all these jobs in order to get that experience. I would not know, am I a marketing expert? No. Am I an advertising expert? No. But I know enough of what that group does to understand how do I put together the right pieces in order to take an idea that I have, an innovation that I want to bring to market, and how do I make that successful?
And teams go to other companies and bring each other along too.
Yep. Yeah, and in fact, in my case, we were talking before, with Bob Davis, my mentor, I went to 3 companies with him, right? And that's how I ended up in Silicon Valley. I graduated, right out of college, I went to work in the western suburbs of Chicago, out in Naperville, Illinois. I wasn't based in the Valley. I wasn't working for a company that was based in the Valley, but because Bob was my mentor, and I felt I still had more to learn from him. I followed him to 3 different companies. Now that I'm at Cable Labs, in fact, I sat down and was thinking about it. I think I've got 6 or 7 people that came from HP to join me at Cable Labs to be part of the team there. And I think, again, back to, my own career success, I would encourage everybody, if you have not identified somebody that you think that can bring value to your career, either because of their role or whatever, find somebody that can be your mentor. Now, here's my warning. If you are truly looking for a mentor, then you got to be willing to do what the mentor asks you to do. This isn't just a one-way street looking for them to open up a door and make an introduction for you to get a job interview. That's not mentoring. Mentoring literally is you are going to serve that mentor in some form. And if they ask you to go do some homework and think about something, put in the effort, put in that time. But if you can, people are lucky to have any kind of a mentor, but to have a mentor that really invests time in your career can be transformative.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you. All right. So open up to questions for all of you folks. Remember, class participation is welcome. Definitely don't be shy. Not everybody has a chance to speak with Phil McKinney, especially these days where there's distance like we have. And he's being gracious enough to be here. So please go ahead and ask any question.
Well, we have a couple of questions in the chat here real quick. What advice you can give students like us starting to enter the technology industry, things that helped you navigate in life generally? Well, I can tell you what I did wrong. My one piece of advice that I would give you is, I wish I had done it differently at the beginning, which is don't focus on the money, right? Particularly in Silicon Valley, it's easy to get kind of sucked into chasing a job because it might be an IPO or you might get some big cash out, right? What I have a personal philosophy. It's my personal philosophy called the 5 F's that I follow. It's number 1 is faith, family, friends, fitness, and finances. So whatever faith you have, whatever you believe, that's great. But that faith helps keep you centered on what's important for you on a personal basis. Family, you don't get success without family and family and friends. You need both. It's not, doing it alone, pretty tough to do, right? Fitness. This is tough. You got to be healthy. You got to take care of yourself. You got to eat right. You got to get good sleep. You got to be, you got to take care of yourself. And the last one is finance. I can tell you every time my career got derailed and I got messed up is when I tried to move finance to the top of the list. That's, if you ask me, what from a personal life lesson, it's the 5 F's for me. So, Angela, was it Angela was going to ask? Were you going to ask a question? So I'll pause and let Angela ask.
Yeah. So first of all, Phil, thank you for your sharing. I feel that I benefit a lot with your with the experience that you shared, and I'm interested in knowing more about how you find your mentor during your career. I feel that when I am, so I work at Tesla as a global supply manager, so I resonate a lot with what you were talking about in supply chain field. And also a lot of time, I feel that I would love to talk to a mentor about some career planning and some like some question about my career, not necessarily about my job like right now. And so I would love to know more about how you look for a mentor and how you build up that relationship. Thank you.
Sure, not a problem. And I can attest. I spent a lot of times with Elon, And I always jokingly say that I have to go take a nap after every one of my meetings with Elon, because that guy is like high energy, so far off the scale, but he does amazing work, and Tesla's an amazing company. So congratulations on your contribution to Tesla's success. When it comes to mentors, if you already have some form of a relationship with somebody who you admire, whether it's in your current company or previous company, or in the case of ITU, you've got access to the alumni at ITU. Finding somebody that has had some form of career success is would probably be the first place to start. Now, a lot of people would be really nervous, right? Because that I don't know them. Are they gonna? Is it presumptuous of me to ask if they would meet with me or whatever? What my advice would be is in your first conversation or your first outreach, don't ask them to be your mentor. You need to make sure it's a match for you. They need to make sure it's a match for them. If it's not a match, then it's just artificial. It's fake. You want somebody that you feel you can get along with, somebody who will be transparent with you, meaning giving you honest feedback on where your strengths and where your weaknesses are at, and somebody that won't just be knocking you down, but also helping build you up, help you, put you on a path of learning, experiences, exposing you to other things that can build out your career. Now, I can say this all I want, but I was fortunate in the fact that I did not pick Bob Davis to be my mentor. He picked me. He recruited me. He hired me. And then within like the first week, I'm like my first real job, right? I'm like on the job for a week. And here the big boss calls me in, right? And then basically gives me this whole lecture on T-shaped versus I-shaped. And if you want career success, you got to be T-shaped. So therefore, guess what? You thought I hired you for software engineering, but guess what? You're now in marketing for the next 6 months. And then after that, you're going to be in sales for 6 months. At the time, I was totally confused. I didn't get it. But nowadays, I look back on it. Bob Davis, he's now retired, lives in Phoenix, Arizona. He volunteers and drives a school bus for special needs kids in Phoenix, Arizona. Right, phenomenal man. But I didn't have to go recruit a mentor. My mentor chose me, which can sometimes happen. But I think people ought to be. You need to be courageous. It takes some courage to identify somebody and then reach out to them and don't do the traditional LinkedIn, send an IM mail on LinkedIn and say, can I pick your brain? I probably get 30 or 40 of those a week, right? And I don't respond to any of them. What I will do is if someone says, hey, I saw your profile, I saw you had experience at XYZ company, that's an industry that I'm involved in or I'm interested in. I currently work here. I'm looking for some career advice. Could I impose upon you to get 15 minutes on a Zoom call? 90% of those requests I take, right? Because someone's willing to put themselves out there. They're willing to say and give some context. It just isn't the one-liner of, hey, can I pick your brain? Can I get an hour of your time? An hour is a lot of time. Be efficient. Take 15 minutes. Have a conversation. And then that conversation may lead to another conversation, then lead to another conversation. And then before you know it, you're in a mentoring relationship. So that would be my advice.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Right.
I think we have one question in the chat box that says, what do you think about collaboration with external parties, specifically in regards to IT security? Pretty often it goes to, we will sue you when somebody shares his security findings. Also, sometimes companies don't pay enough attention and at the same time don't allow to check their systems legally through black hats that don't care about these restrictions.
Yeah, I mean, security creates a whole different kind of an issue. Collaboration, I think, in security is just, I don't think of security as anything different than any other collaboration opportunity, whether it's collaborating for Gorilla Glass or something else, right? I think the whole white hat, black hat, and the process of of paying bounties for those kinds of things, I think those are kind of a little bit of a unique case. But I think organizations overall need to find ways to collaborate. In this whole issue of some in the security world, we run into a little bit of this issue where people, comes across that quote, I'm collaborating, but it comes across of who gets credit and who's rubbing whose nose into the issue, right? Who's like, yeah, I told you, you have you had a security problem, right? I think collaborating early on rather than collaborating based on exposure is a whole different issue. So I think collaboration is also built on trust in the fact that nobody's out to one up anybody, nobody's out there to discredit somebody. It is really around true collaboration, and I think that is that is important as any other technology area. And in fact, Brian Scriber, who heads up security research at Cable Labs, would be the first one to tell you, right, about the importance of collaboration for us on the security side is critical. And we don't think about it as one item. We think about it as just collaboration as a whole for us.
I think part of it's a relationship with the two entities and with the people, right? It's
correct. Yeah. Correct. And if like, for instance, we work with universities on security research, right? And we will actually we'll bend over backwards and give them access to things that they just normally wouldn't have access to in order to try to find issues, with our systems. But that's a collaboration effort. And yes, they can write their papers and they can publish their research, and that expose, that identifying what happened or what the issue was helps others then, overall raise the bar on security. But nobody reacts well to getting called out on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. So, that's not collaboration. That's abuse.
This has been very collaborative. By the way, we appreciate your mentoring tonight. Nobody had to send you the LinkedIn for tonight, so we really appreciate that. Does anybody have any other questions? Okay, I'm going to give it 5 seconds because I know it's getting late over there on the East Coast, Phil. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. So Phil, we want to say a big, huge thank you. If everybody could turn on your microphones, then certainly we can say thank you and have a lovely evening. You have been unbelievably insightful and helpful, and we appreciate you very much.
I enjoy it. I always enjoy my interactions with ITU, the professors, and the students.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
So
you.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.